The city was growing so fast that even the elders shook their heads in wonder. Where drums once echoed across open land, tall glass towers now touched the sky. The old market still stood at the heart of the city, its wooden stalls leaning like tired men who had seen many seasons. But behind it rose shining buildings with windows that reflected the sun like sharp mirrors. People said the city had two hearts. One beat with the rhythm of drums, laughter, and bargaining voices. The other beat with ringing phones, fast cars, and air-conditioned silence. In the evenings, when the sun turned red, you could stand at the edge of the market and see both worlds at once. Dust from the roadside mixed with the cold glow of office lights. It was as if tradition and modern ambition were wrestling in the same small space. On one side of the road, women sat behind wooden tables covered with tomatoes, peppers, and warm bread wrapped in cloth. On the other side, men in clean suits stepped out of tall buildings, holding leather bags and speaking English through small shining phones. The bread sellers wiped sweat from their foreheads. The office workers wiped nothing at all. The poor looked across the road and dreamed. The rich looked across the road and remembered where they came from, or at least, they tried to remember. At dawn, before the city fully opened its eyes, smoke rose into the pale sky like soft prayers. Women bent over charcoal stoves, fanning small flames with pieces of cardboard. The air smelled of yeast, firewood, and hope. Traders began to call out their prices in loud, proud voices. Fresh bread. Hot bread. Sweet oranges. Come and taste. The market woke like a child being gently shaken from sleep. Roosters crowed. Goats bleated. Somewhere, an old radio played a high-life song that crackled through the morning air. In that hour, before the noise of traffic took over, the city still belonged to its mothers and daughters. Among them was a young woman who carried more than a basket on her head. She carried her family. Her name was Amara. Her father had died when she was just 15, leaving behind silence and unpaid bills. Since then, she had become the pillar of her small house at the edge of the city. The roof leaked during heavy rains, and the walls were cracked like dry earth, but inside that house lived dignity. Amara's mother often said, "We may not have money, but we must never lose our name." Amara believed those words. She carried them the way she carried trays of bread, carefully, with balance. Her younger siblings still slept on thin mats while she worked. She paid their school fees with coins saved one by one. She bought medicine for her mother when the coughing grew strong. She did not complain. In the market, people called her the Quiet River, because she moved steadily and did not make noise about her struggles. Long before the rooster crowed, Amara was already awake. In the darkness, she would tie her wrapper tightly around her waist and light the small lantern in their kitchen. The room would glow gold as she poured flour into a wide bowl. Her hands moved with skill, mixing, kneading, pressing. The dough stuck to her fingers, but she did not mind. She had been doing this for years. Outside, the sky slowly changed from black to deep blue. Her mother would sometimes rise and sit beside her. "Child," her mother would say softly, "rest a little." Amara would smile without stopping her work. "If I rest, Mama, who will carry us?" The dough would rise like a promise. She shaped it into small loaves and placed them carefully into the oven heated by charcoal. Soon, the smell of fresh bread filled the house. It was warm and comforting, like a hug from someone who understood hunger. In their culture, bread was not just food. It was life. It was survival. It was the answer to an empty stomach and a long day. Amara treated every loaf as if it carried her future inside it. When she stepped into the street with her tray balanced on her head, the warmth from the bread spread down to her shoulders. She walked straight and proud. Each loaf was a shield against poverty. Each coin she earned was a brick in the house she hoped to build one day. The elders in the market often watched her with kind eyes. One old woman, who sold roasted corn, once said, "This girl's hands are blessed. She works like the women of old." Amara would bow her head respectfully. "It is God who blesses the work, Mama." She had been raised not by wealth, but by wisdom. Her mother told her stories in the evenings, stories of women who survived storms because their hearts were strong, stories of men who lost everything because they forgot who helped them climb, stories of rivers that dried when they forgot their source. "Never let pride enter your heart," her mother would say. Pride is like a small crack in a clay pot. At first, you do not see it. But one day, the water is gone. Amara listened. She carried those lessons like invisible jewelry around her neck. In the market, she greeted elders properly, kneeling when required. She shared unsold bread with hungry children instead of throwing it away. When another seller fell sick, she helped watch her stall without expecting payment. People trusted her. They said her bread tasted better because it was kneaded with honesty. As the sun rose higher and the city became louder, Amara stood between two worlds, the dusty road of tradition and the shining towers of ambition. She did not yet know how deeply those two worlds would shape her life. But every morning, as she walked with her tray of bread, she felt strong. She believed that hard work and loyalty were enough to build a future. And in the distance, beyond the noise of the market and the glow of tall buildings, Destiny was already watching her steps. Tund stood at the edge of the crowded street, the clamor of the market all around him. He watched the towering glass buildings rise in the distance, reflecting the sun like pillars of promise. To anyone else, they were cold and distant, but to him, they were homes for the powerful, the respected, the men who held the city in their hands. "One day I will walk among them," he whispered, almost to himself. "Not as a visitor, but as one they cannot ignore." Yet each day in the bustling streets reminded him of what he was not. He watched other young men rest and laugh under the shade of the mango trees, while he walked tirelessly from one side of the city to the other, carrying his dreams like heavy clay. His impatience burned in him like the harmattan wind, hot, unrelenting, scratching at his bones, reminding him that the world moved too slowly for him. He spoke often of his plans, his voice rich with fire. "I will own businesses. I will shake hands with men who decide fates. I will not be another face the city forgets," he said one evening to Amara as the sun dipped low over the dusty streets. Yet his pockets were empty, carrying only dust and folded hope, while his words rolled out like gold coins on the bare market stones. Deep within him, a shadow had grown. He had seen his father bow to men wealthier, his mother wait hours at offices with no help in sight. He feared remaining invisible, fading like a whisper in the city's noise. "I cannot be small," he murmured at night, staring at the dark ceiling. "I will not be ignored." Amara, who sold bread beside him in the market, was the first to understand him. While others laughed at his lofty words, she listened. She saw the hunger behind his boldness, the fear beneath his pride. "Dreams are not foolish," she said gently, arranging her fresh loaves on a tray. "A bird that never stretches its wings will blame the sky." Her trust became his foundation. When Tund hesitated, doubted himself, or faltered under the weight of the city, she reminded him of his strength. One evening, as the orange light of dusk painted the market, he shared his plan, a small trading business, buying goods from the outskirts and selling them in the city. "I need capital," he admitted, lowering his eyes. "Not much. Just enough to begin." Amara thought of the tin box under her bed, filled with coins saved from years of bread sales. Her hands trembled as she carried it to him. "This is everything I have," she said softly. "Use it well." Tund's eyes widened, disbelief and gratitude mingling. "Amara, this is your life," he whispered. "Our future," she corrected. "If you rise, we rise together." From that day, her sacrifice became visible in every action. She woke before the sun, kneading larger bowls of dough, carrying heavier trays to the market. Hunger touched her body, but never her spirit. She drank water instead of eating, smiled instead of complaining, and her strength became the wind beneath Tund's wings. Together they worked. Together they dreamed. Their love was not built on fleeting sweetness, but on shared struggle. Tund patched her leaking roof during heavy rains. She encouraged him when deals fell through. Slowly, the market began to take notice. Elders nodded knowingly. "See how they rise together," one whispered. "That is a union of hearts and strength." Children ran past them, laughing, while traders paused to watch their partnership. Young men envied Tund's determination matched with love. Young girls whispered of Amara's courage. The community blessed their bond quietly, like a prayer carried by the wind, admiring a love rooted in loyalty, sacrifice, and hope. Side by side, they moved through the dusty streets, carrying dreams taller than the skyscrapers above, believing that together they could conquer the city, and that no storm, no wind, no river rising too quickly could break the foundation they had built. Their story, whispered from stall to stall, became one the market repeated, a tale of ambition, trust, and the quiet power of believing in each other before the world had even noticed. The elders of the neighborhood gathered under the shade of a large iroko tree, their faces lined with years of sun and wisdom. One of them, a man with a voice like rolling thunder, leaned on his walking stick and said, "Child, remember this. When a river grows wide, it forgets its source, it cannot feed those who built its banks." His words were meant for Tund, though no one spoke the boy's name aloud. The other elders nodded, their eyes sharp and full of warning. The market listened in quiet reverence, knowing that the wise speak in parables before calamity finds the careless. Tund, standing nearby with his new shoes still shiny from the cobbler's polish, smiled faintly. But something in his posture had changed. His voice, once warm and full of youthful hope, now carried a sharper edge. He corrected small mistakes in pronunciation when speaking to traders, walked with his shoulders a little higher, and lingered less at Amara's stall. The flour on her hands no longer seemed sweet to him, it reminded him of the dust he longed to leave behind. He began venturing farther from the dusty streets where loaves were stacked high and goats wandered freely. Now he walked into neighborhoods with paved roads and gardens protected by wrought iron fences. The air smelled different there, cool, perfumed, and alive with ambition. He entered cafes where businessmen discussed numbers he only recently learned, where women wore dresses that shimmered like river sunlight, and where children laughed behind polished gates. Each step away from the market, each conversation with a man or woman who counted wealth in zeros rather than coins, pulled him further from the world that had nurtured him. Meanwhile, Amara rose before the sun as always, kneading dough and arranging bread with silent devotion. Each loaf she shaped was a quiet offering, a testament to the sacrifices made without complaint. She gave more than she ate, worked longer than the day demanded, and still smiled when customers came for their daily bread. In those early hours, the market whispered of her perseverance, but Tund's footsteps were moving elsewhere, toward dreams that sparkled like the city skyline. Even as he carried ambition in his chest, the first threads of tension began to weave themselves quietly. Gratitude tugged at him, reminding him of the girl who had trusted him before the world did, yet his desire for recognition whispered louder, pulling him toward streets lined with wealth. Love and loyalty, once a guiding rhythm, now competed with ambition's louder drum. The elders' words lingered, unspoken in the corners of the city. A river that forgets its source becomes shallow. A man who forgets the hands that lifted him will find no ground beneath his feet. Tund's steps were deliberate as he approached the shining side of the city, each polished shoe marking a slow drift from the dusty stalls where the smell of baking bread still hung like morning mist. In his heart, a river of desire for more began to swell, threatening to flood the banks of loyalty, sacrifice, and simple love that Amara had so faithfully tended. And so, the city watched him walk, a young man with eyes full of skyscrapers, ambition blazing like harmattan fire, words of gold spilling from lips that carried little else, and a hidden fear gnawing beneath, the fear of being forgotten, unseen, insignificant. The river had begun to widen, and only time would tell whether its current would nurture or destroy. Tund walked through the market with a new rhythm in his step, the polished leather of his shoes catching the morning light. His shirts no longer smelled of smoke or flour. They were crisp, tailored, and stiff with starch. The elders might still see the boy they once knew, but the city began to see a man who belonged in rooms where power whispered behind closed doors. He straightened his back as he passed, eyes lifted, voice measured, and pride blooming like the jacaranda trees along the city streets. Yet when he looked at Amara, kneeling over her dough, the simple apron dusted with flour, a strange discomfort pricked him. Her hands, once his source of warmth and strength, now seemed to belong to another world, one of hard labor and dust. "Amara," he said carefully one afternoon, "you must think beyond these stalls. There is more to life than kneading dough and calling out prices." His words were soft, but they cut sharper than the knives she used daily. The space where he once leaned casually, laughing with her between customers, now felt painfully empty. Amara glanced at the spot beside her stall, then down at her tray of fresh bread, trying not to let her heart crack under the silence. Customers noticed the absence too, whispering among themselves. The market felt different, as if the rhythm of the day itself had shifted. Status, influence, connections. Tund spoke more often now, even when she was near. "Do you understand what it means to be respected? To be seen? To enter rooms that shape futures?" His tone suggested frustration, not affection, and each word made the distance between them wider than the city streets. The love they had nurtured together seemed small in comparison to the glittering doors he now knocked upon. Into this shifting world stepped Iamide, the daughter of a wealthy businessman. She arrived with a grace that seemed to ripple through the dusty market like a breeze over calm water. Her clothes shimmered with silk and lace, her hair set perfectly, and the faint scent of imported perfume followed her footsteps. Children stopped to stare, women murmured admiringly, and even Tund felt a pulse of awe he could not entirely hide. She had returned from afar, educated across the great waters, polished and confident, carrying herself with a poise that spoke of worlds most could only dream of. Her laugh sounded like wind over polished stones, and her smile held both promise and calculation. "Your business is growing, I hear," she said, her tone light, yet every word felt like an assessment. "Perhaps we could help each other." High heels clicked against the stone streets as she approached meetings and gatherings with a silent authority. Where she went, doors opened, invitations followed, and whispers of opportunity surrounded her. Tund found himself drawn toward this symbol of wealth, status, and easy access to circles that had once seemed unreachable. The promises came wrapped in smiles and firm handshakes. Contracts, partnerships, expansions, all offered as if the world itself waited for Tund to take them. His friends leaned closer in crowded cafes and whispered of class, of marrying a woman of means, of securing a future that would shield him from failure. "Think carefully, Tund," said one of his associates, swirling a cup of tea. "A woman who understands the world you are entering can help you rise faster than any stall or savings ever could. Your heart is valuable, but your empire is priceless." Even the wealthy father watched him, eyes calculating, offering opportunities only if Tund proved worthy. Marriage became a strategy, love measured not by shared hardship but by potential gain. "Serious commitment," the elder had said once over polished mahogany, "is required if you wish to step into partnership." And so, Tund began to weigh his life not by loyalty, not by the girl who had sacrificed bread and sleep for him, but by the numbers in a ledger, the status in his hand, and the doors that might open if he chose correctly. The city shifted around him, the dusty market fading in memory, while the bright streets of wealth beckoned with promises that smelled sweeter than any charcoal fire. The river of ambition had begun to flow, widening with each choice, and the lesson of the elders, the river that forgets its source, lingered quietly in the corner of his mind, unheeded, as his footsteps moved steadily toward the shimmering promise of the shining side of the city. Amara noticed it first in the mornings. Tund, once eager to lean over her stall and greet the first customers, now lingered at the edge, his eyes scanning the city streets rather than hers. She forced a smile as she arranged the bread, letting hope speak louder than suspicion. "Perhaps he is just busy," she whispered to herself, kneading the dough with steady hands, the rising aroma filling the air like a prayer for better days. She worked harder, rising before the sun, adding more trays of bread, stretching herself beyond hunger and fatigue. Every loaf she shaped, every coin saved, was a thread tying them together, a silent plea to hold what she feared was slipping through her fingers. Even when the market chatter grew louder, she poured strength into her labor, believing that success had merely pulled him into another rhythm of life. The market women spoke in hushed voices, glances darting toward Tund whenever he passed through the square. "Did you see how he looked at her?" one whispered. Another shook her head, pity mingling with judgment. Rumors traveled like wind across the stalls, words heavier than the sacks of grain piled high around them. Amara kept her head down, listening without answering, her loyalty a shield forged from years of sacrifice. Her mother watched quietly from the shade of their small home nearby. "Child," she said softly one afternoon, touching Amara's flower-streaked hands, "pride has a way of hiding where hearts should be. Wealth can blind even the ones we trust most." Amara nodded, her eyes steady. "I will not bend," she replied, a quiet fire burning behind her calm gaze. Love, she knew, was tested in silence as much as in laughter. Then, the city revealed its sharp truth. Tund was spotted beneath the dazzling lights of a high-profile gala, smiling beside the rich girl whose elegance seemed to eclipse the dust and warmth of the market. Cameras clicked, capturing moments that would travel faster than any word of warning. Photos spread across the city, gossip weaving its invisible threads through streets and offices, faster than smoke from Amara's morning fires. And then the announcement came. His voice, amplified over the crowd, rang with pride and finality. "I am engaged to someone who matches the life I am building," he said, the words cutting through the marketplace like a spear. Beneath the mango tree where elders often met, gasps erupted, murmurs of disbelief and concern flowing through the gathered community. "What about her?" some whispered, though none dared speak too loudly. "I have moved forward," Tun said when someone called his name, his eyes not meeting Amara's, as if to erase the past entirely. "I need someone who matches my place now." His words fell like stones into the dusty ground, shaking her quiet world. Her hands trembled as she heard the news. A tray of freshly baked bread slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the ground. Loaves tumbled across the dirt, rolling over one another like fallen dreams, each one a symbol of her sacrifice and loyalty now overlooked. She bent down, gathering what she could, but the bread no longer smelled of hope, it carried the bitter scent of betrayal. Around her, the city moved without pause. Cars honked, traders called their prices, children ran laughing past the stalls. Life continued, unaware of the heartbreak at the center of the market square. Amara stood in the middle of it, bread scattered at her feet, a river of quiet resilience forming in the midst of the storm. The river of her sacrifice was broken, yet still it flowed, stronger if unseen than any flashy promise or fleeting love. The city whispered with a new rhythm, one born of ambition and splendor. Amara felt the sting of betrayal deep in her bones. Years of devotion, hands blistered from kneading dough, and nights spent counting coins to feed both love and hope, all repaid with a rejection as cold as the glass towers reflecting the morning sun. Each loaf she had sold to lift him, every penny saved, seemed to vanish in the bright lights of another life he now embraced. Between them, an invisible wall grew, higher than any fence in the market square. The streets he once walked beside her now seemed foreign. Wealth, like a creeping vine, had wrapped itself around his heart, separating them in ways that words could not reach. The dusty earth where their shared dreams had been planted now looked smaller, insignificant, as if their love had been a mere chapter in a book of climbing ambitions. He moved through this new life, blinded by pride, his eyes seeing only reflection in mirrors and admiration from strangers. Gratitude, once whispered in quiet moments between them, had no place here. He did not notice the hands that built his empire, nor the heart that had trusted him when the world did not. The sun rose daily, but its warmth no longer reached the man who had forgotten the river of his roots. And yet, the city watched. African tradition remembered everything, the kind acts, the sacrifices, the loyalty. Traders paused mid-sale, elders murmured behind the mango trees, and mothers told their children the story of devotion and betrayal without knowing names. The market square became a silent witness, a court of memory, where every misstep and misjudgment was catalogued and never forgotten. Love, though tested, refused to bend. Amara stood firm in the quiet struggle between affection and social ambition. Her heart, though bruised, remained steadfast. She knew the battle was not just hers but a reflection of a greater truth. Loyalty and sincerity must endure against the temptations of status and power. Meanwhile, the city prepared for another celebration, unaware of the hearts it had wounded. Drums boomed louder than conscience, their rhythm filling the streets with music meant to dazzle, to impress, to hide the quiet warnings of fate. Every corner was decorated with flowers and ribbons, gilded with colors meant to signify joy, yet beneath them, whispers of caution drifted like smoke, ignored in the brilliance of the spectacle. Cameras flashed like lightning before a storm, capturing smiles and applause while shadows of regret and judgment stretched long behind the crowd. Every photo, every moving image, transformed love into a display and ambition into a performance. The city's gaze, once simple and honest, now measured, scrutinized, and sensationalized, turning personal devotion into public spectacle. And tied to this performance, marriage papers glinted with golden promises. Contracts were signed, wealth bound to union, ambition intertwined with vows. Ink on parchment held more power than hearts in this new world. It was a fragile rope, woven of gold and expectation, threatening to snap at the slightest weight of pride or the misstep of forgotten loyalty. In the midst of all this, Amara's gaze lingered on the scattered crumbs of her sacrifice, remembering that love, in its quiet courage, had its own voice, one that would not be silenced by wealth, spectacle, or the temporary glimmer of someone else's status. The moment he thought he had reached the summit, the ground beneath him shifted. The father of the rich girl, with eyes as sharp as the eagle's talons, never saw him as an equal. "A son-in-law must serve the family, not lead it," the elder said once, smiling in that calm, measured way that hides the teeth of judgment. Contracts were signed, papers sealed, and quietly, the reins of power slid from his hands into theirs. The ink on the parchment, still wet, whispered a warning that went unheard. Control had left him. He sat in his polished office, the sunlight glinting off golden frames, and realized the cage he had built with ambition was gilded but firm. Invitations to meetings became invitations to watch. Decisions were made around him, smiles polite but sharp, cutting him down without a word. "Your voice is heard, but your word carries no weight," the wealthy daughter said, her tone soft yet decisive. He nodded, swallowing the bitter truth. He had climbed only to find himself chained. Contracts that once promised growth now fell like dry soil in a parched field. Deals he had nurtured, letters of commitment carefully drafted, began to unravel. Legal notices arrived, sealed with marks of trouble, shaking his confidence and stoking fear where pride had once lived. Investors, drawn to influence rather than loyalty, quietly withdrew, their silence louder than any rejection he had faced before. His name, once shining on walls and ledgers, disappeared, leaving an empty space that mocked his ambition. He tasted the bitterness of realization, each swallow sharp and unforgiving. The world he had sought to conquer had become a mirror reflecting his own misjudgment. The engagement, once meant to tie wealth and future together, dissolved quietly. No drums celebrated, no music played, the air was heavy with unspoken disappointment. Doors closed without warning, the family he thought would support him now kept distance, their smiles polite, their presence absent. Beneath the mango tree, the city whispered. Traders, neighbors, and even children repeated stories of his fall, their voices carrying a mixture of pity and caution. Those who had once lifted him on their tongues now laughed at his misfortune, reminding him how swiftly honor can turn to ridicule. He had sought power, yet power had slipped through his fingers, leaving him to face the harsh truth. Ambition without wisdom and trust without vigilance are fragile things. Amid this storm, he remembered the early mornings of bread and toil, the warmth of a woman who had believed in him before wealth or status. But memory offered no rescue, only the sharp contrast between what he had and what he lost. The city moved on, indifferent, its pulse unchanged by the rise and fall of a man who had forgotten the roots that had carried him this far. The mornings returned to him in memory, though the city's glass towers still gleamed in reality. He remembered the charcoal smoke curling from small fires, the first light breaking over dusty streets, the rhythm of women preparing their stalls. Each scent of bread, warm and yeasty, carried a story of devotion, a life given quietly for hope to grow. He saw her then, the girl who stood like a baobab tree, rooted firm despite wind and hardship, believing in a dream he barely dared name. How blind he had been, his pride settling like dust over his eyes, hiding the truth of loyalty and love. He whispered to himself the old proverb his mother had once repeated, "A tree that forgets its roots dries from within." The weight of it settled deep, heavier than any coin, heavier than any title. He understood, finally, that success measured in wealth alone was empty when it ignored the hands and hearts that lifted him. Silence in his mansion echoed around him, mocking him with the emptiness of gold without honor. Shame pressed down, and the ladder he had climbed felt brittle beneath his feet, each rung a reminder of trust betrayed and love discarded. Meanwhile, she refused to crumble. Tears fell, yes, but they watered a new strength. Her hands, once weary from kneading and selling bread, now worked with purpose to gather the crumbs of her life and build again. Slowly, she opened a small bakery, modest in size but rich in courage. She welcomed women who struggled, teaching them the dignity of work, of shared hope, of quiet independence. The market watched in awe as respect grew around her, not given for status or charm, but earned in sweat, loyalty, and resilience. Through it all, he remained a shadow of his former pride, learning too late the weight of devotion, while she rose like the sun over both dusty streets and modern towers, her life a testament to the truth of African wisdom. Roots and loyalty sustained far longer than the glitter of gold. The fire in her oven was steady, slow, as though it understood the rhythm of patience. Each loaf rose with golden warmth, carrying the quiet lesson that only time and care yield lasting reward. Coins stacked in her small box were earned honestly, a testament that wealth built on discipline and not deceit endures, even when the world rushes toward easy gains. Her roots ran deep in honest soil, nurtured by sweat, loyalty, and resilience, and though progress came gradually, it stood firm, unshakable, like a tree whose branches touch the sky yet whose roots drink from the earth below. One afternoon, he appeared at the edge of the market. The man who once walked with arrogance, draped in ambition, now returned humbly, stripped of shadows that had once hidden his fear. Gold was gone, power dissipated, leaving behind a weight heavier than coins, regret. He approached her, voice low, eyes trembling. "I have come to ask for forgiveness," he said, each word carried like a heavy load over his shoulders, "for all that I failed to see, for the loyalty I ignored." Around them, the market paused. Women paused their calls, children slowed their running games, and elders leaned on canes, watching. Every eye observed, remembering the rise and fall of the man who had once dreamed too boldly. She met him calmly, face serene, heart unburdened by anger. "Your apology is heard," she replied, her voice steady, "but some paths are not meant to be walked again." She would not reopen old wounds. Her hands returned to the dough, kneading strength and hope into each loaf. Tears watered her determination, not her sorrow. She gathered crumbs, rebuilt her business, and opened a small bakery, modest but filled with courage. Other women came, learning from her example, lifting themselves as she had lifted them, sharing dignity and quiet power. Respect was earned, not given, and the market, once witness to betrayal, now honored her resilience. Morning returned, but it was a new dawn. Bread was displayed with pride, laughter and children's songs replaced the whispers of old pain. The sun rose over dusty stalls and glass towers alike, touching both tradition and progress. The city remained divided, yet she stood whole, rooted and wise, unshaken by the winds of ambition. True wealth, she knew, lives in character. Ambition without gratitude leads only to ruin, and those grounded in values will endure the storms that sweep through the restless heart of the city.